All right, lock your deadbolts, lock your doors, check your 45, check your 45 that the magazines are full. I'm back with another book review about the extremely odd and bizarre personality of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, by Catherine Ramsland, PhD. So, I'm going to read some excerpts out of this book, and there's spoilers ahead, so I hope you enjoy it. So, the excerpts that I'm going to read, well, first I should say, Catherine Ramsland, how the book came together. She is a professor of criminology and some other degrees at DeSales University, and she's been on a lot of TV talk shows recently with Carrie Rawson, BTK's daughter, and she's been on shows about Ted Bundy and other serial killers. She's one of the top criminologists in the United States, probably in the world. She's she's as good as it gets. So this book this book was supposed to be written by somebody else who was corresponding with Rader, and for whatever reason they had to drop the ball. So she saw that they couldn't finish it, so she offered to do it, and she had to get full clearance with the victim's family, and wrote a proposal saying that this would be a, quote, guided autobiography, and that it would benefit the field of criminology and police. It goes deep into his childhood and some about his crimes, but more so about his childhood and his fantasy life, and what made him the psychopath predator that he was. So I'm going to read some excerpts about his early life and about his sex life, and about just some odds and ends that I find interesting. So he was from Wichita, Kansas, but when he was real young, he spent his early years way out in rural Kansas, where, we're talking back in the late 40s. Kids would roam about all summer long, and go in abandoned barns and fish, and do things that rural kids did. So he says, Dad's cousin Bob moved near us with his wife Betty. We spent time at their place as they did as well at our place. Mom and Betty took turns taking care of us. In a way, besides the Riverview moms, Betty became my second mom. She loved poetry and read all the time. She hated cats. She would tell of stories of drowning cats in gunny sacks at her farms. Like me, she thought they held a secret mystical power, an evil that had to be put down, which was the term that he used for his victims at his sentencing hearing. And he says her stories may have influenced me to seek them out as bondage victims, the cats. I did drown a cat or two. And he also tied up cats and hung cats, and young age here. She also humiliated him when he had his first sexual admission, and she tried to beat me, he says. She held my hands behind my back and used a man's belt to beat me. Funny, it hurt, but Sparky, nickname for his penis, liked it. Mom finally quit and said, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Cook's barn was a faded red color. Whenever I would enter the silo, I felt a tightness in the groin area, or the neck and neck hair feeling. Particularly, it was good to climb the ladder. It felt like it was the cookie jar. So he called the cookie jar, like all his sleazy detective magazines and things like that. That was the cookie jar. things that, guilty pleasures, basically. We use the silo as a fort. Well, this sounds like typical kid stuff, but in his case, it's not. Being tied up triggered a sexual feeling early in life as we played cowboy and Indians and used ropes on our pretend horses. I was fantasizing bondage by 8th grade. I was drawing bondage pictures and doing self bondage. During the 1950s, a dim-witted cartoon character named Dudley Do-Right starred in the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. Do-Right is always trying to catch his nemesis, Snidely Whiplash, who has a habit of tying the redhead Nell to the railroad track. Do-Right always rescues her as the train approaches. Rader loved the white hat rescue, meaning the good guy, and in contrast to the black hat. And he could do that splitting between good guy and bad guy easily. I suppose as kids can do when they're playing, but he took it to another level. Now we're going to talk about the detective magazines, the sleazy crime magazines back then, where you'd see like a woman on the cover being tied up with a knife at her throat by a sleazy guy with big bushy hairdo. Rader had spotted the 1959 issue of Front Page Detective under the seat of the family car. It belonged to my father. He grabbed it. The cover photo showed a terrified woman firmly bound and gagged. The feature story was called The Sex-Crazed Photographer and His Graveyard of Models. So this was a story about Harvey Glattman. Of all the serial killers that Rader read about and admired, his number one was Harvey Glattman, because Harvey Glattman had a bondage obsession. And Glattman would offer women employment, saying that he worked for Detective Magazine, and then he would get them all tied up, and then he would tell them that he didn't work for Detective Magazine and that they were going to be killed, and then he would photograph the fear and terror in their face. And Rader BTK says that those images seared in his mind the rest of his life from this Front Page Detective magazine. That they seared in his mind for the rest of his life. And Ted Bundy also brought up these detective magazines and the Hillside Stranglers. Back then in the 50s and 60s and even the 70s and 80s, these magazines were really trashy. They were true crime stories that came in the form of a magazine. And, they always had some sleazy guy with a gun at a woman's head. I mean, just imagine that stuff getting published now. There'd probably be outrage. I don't think they're still being made anyways. So anyways, he says that those were the pictures that I had always dreamed about. And then he says that the rope was the key, and that the detective magazines were, quote, cookie jar big time for me. So those were the his forbidden fruit. He also talks about an incident where his mother got her wedding ring stuck in the couch in the springs, and that she was screaming for him to help her, and he just stood there turned on at the fact of at the sight of his mom in such distress. Not that he had any sexual thing for his mother, it was more for the fact that she was, bound to the couch and in fear and in terror. This stuff turned him on big time. Okay, so now I'm going to skip way ahead through this. And, okay, so now he's talking about the victim, Vicky Wegerly. One reason, so I went to Waggerly's door, knocked, and asked her if I could check the telephone lines. She let me in. When she looked away, I pulled a gun on her. She was so scared she started to cry, and her 1 year old son was there, and she was afraid for him, obviously. Luckily, he didn't touch her 1 year old son. But just the nerve to say what he's about to say here just makes me shake my head. One reason I picked the Weggerlys was the covered porch. The door was less visible to drive-bys. Now, she was a piano teacher, a music teacher. As I approached, I could hear a piano sound, so she became Project Piano. In other words, he had already been stalking her, and he named her Project Piano because he thought he was some big spy, playing some spy game. And then he said, now she plays piano. Now he says, organ music would have been better. And I'm just reading this like, okay, so you destroyed her family. The husband was suspect number one, traumatized her kid, and your reply to that, or your thoughts on that 30 years later are that organ music would have been better. Wow, wow. And it's almost funny. And then, let's see, what else do I have here? All right, I'm going to have to come back for the part 2. Thanks. This was his torture silo that he drew.